Today is the 25th of April, 1983. And for the record, we're still at the Weizmann Institute in Rehoveth, Israel. And we're now discussing the development of Golem. This is the fourth cassette that I've done since yesterday. This is the on the audio track.
Okay. So, the areas that we haven't covered so far are the continuation of the Golem ape and the development of the dual processor system with the disk and some real software, not of the kind that Hans was talking about, but a compiler, a Fortran compiler, and so on. But altogether, we haven't touched the area of software at all. And as I said, I'd like to just introduce this. I would prefer if people who are closer to it would take up that point. I have some documents here which just sort of fix the dates for us, and maybe aside from just giving some dates and showing these documents, I will to tie the thing down. Why I'd like people to comment freely what they remember, particularly since here there are some heavy users who had to struggle with this software and so on. So it was mentioned before that we started with a gap. Well, all the assembly programs are called GAP because GAP simply means Golem Assembly Program. But initially this was done on the CDC 160A. That is, the programs were assembled and collected on a tape, and then it would be run in batch. Eventually, though, I have a document here written by Moshe Natanel, who did a lot of the software, which is dated November 1965, and it talks about an assembly program has been written to run on Golem, and it mentions that the earlier one was a cross-assembler that ran on the 160A. Then I have I also have an Golem engineering reference manual, which no, I guess that isn't what I wanted. I hope I didn't leave that. Yeah. Oh, yes. There is a Golem manual which doesn't have all these sections, but it mentions all the software, and including the Golem Fortran library, Golem assembly program, and then it goes on to the more advanced operating systems, the Disk 1, and they list a whole lot of variations of the Disk 1 for Fortran programmers, for machine language programmers, and then they talk about the WITS system, which is Weizmann Institute time-sharing system, which we'll get to maybe when we discuss some of the hardware developments. And finally, they have a discard system, which was based on disk and card, and was a kind of a multitask system where you could just come along with a program and no longer have to run batch, but you could go and put your card deck on the reader, and then the thing would take it in and run it when it was ready, and then type out your results, print out your results on the printer. And it was called the discard system. I don't know whether that ever got into operation. I think it worked for some years. And this document doesn't carry a date, I guess, which is unfortunate. But I do have some others. I have one other document, which is the disk system. Disk 1 for GAP programmers, which was written by Bob Perlman, and it's dated July 66. I can also tell you when the disk was installed and things of that sort. I think the manual for the disk even is dated 68, but the disk was actually installed in 60. Started in 66. It was probably running in 67, and the manual was completed in 68.
Exactly.
So with that, I'd like you to other people to pick up from there and talk about the development of the software.
Well, perhaps, pardon me, it should be mentioned, I think, that after the first complete Golem system, hardware-wise, was complete, that we built a copy of that, which took another year, which brought us from 65 into 66.
I did mention that, but we'll perhaps come back to that. I'd like to cover maybe now the software picture in the early days, and then with the second machine, we get to the disk systems.
I came back in September '63 after having been at the University of Illinois for a year. We wrote a 3-pass assembler there for the Iliac 2, and this was the time when the Golem A was ready to run its first programs, and there was a very urgent request by Professor Pekeris to show some results, since he needed to go to a conference in early '64. And the programs had been running on the Transac, and the question was, how long would it take to translate them into assembly program on the Golem? And I made a suggestion, which was then carried out. Since the Transac had a 3-address code, all we have to do is to write a 3-address assembler, and all the programs that ran on Transac would run on Golem, and so it was. So Professor Pekeris got us the results, and I think this was the first production program that actually ran on the Golem. After it was completed.
I remember vaguely. I wrote a program to compute decimal functions to high accuracy on the Golem. I think this was the first demonstration program of a computational nature there.
Yes, but the first real big problem appears to have run in November of '63, and nobody has picked that up. Is that the one you were talking about?
Yeah.
I see.
This was something written before I had to show it to somebody. The Golem working.
I think Pekeris went off to Moscow
with
those
right.
results,
Yeah.
and he said, "Here, I've got this, and does anyone have anything to beat this?"
And it was done on the Golem.
It was done on the Golem, yes.
Was that the material the Russians published that he later asked them to pay royalties on? They refused because they said the time limit was that was early.
So maybe you have something to say, Yigal, about struggling with the machine in the early days before we had some good software.
Actually, I was not participating here on the first days of running the Golem, because I spent my time somewhere else, and I came back sometimes in summer '64, but I was still lucky to run the Golem without card reader and running through the cross assembler on the 160. And the first program was a translation of a program that I had running on the Weizac, which I skipped on the 1604. I didn't run this program on the 1604. Actually, the program was to evaluate eigenvalues of very large matrices.
This was in connection with this spectroscopy, with atomic spectroscopy.
Yes. The first test was I took the things that I ran on the Weizac during maybe 6 years or so, and I checked the results. It took me about 2 weeks to check all the results of the 6 years of the Weizac. And then I was satisfied that I have a running program, and I carried on going from matrices on the Weizac. I computed only matrices up to order, I think it was 220 or something like this, by 220, and then I went on the Golem up to about 1,000 by 1,000.
These were symmetric full matrices, but you had much larger sparse matrices later on the
up
tides.
to about 2,500.
Oh yes, but some people ran 100,000, 100,000 sparse matrices on the tie problem.
Yes, this was not the calculation of eigenvalues.
That's correct. That's
computing finite differences, approximation to partial differential equations. This was another problem.
One thing I think that one should take into consideration is that the speed of the golem was approximately 100 times the speed of Weizac. So what could be done in 8 years of Weizac could be done in 1 month, approximately, of golem.
Yeah, well, it would be fair to compare it to machines which were available at the time. And if we compare it to the IBM machine, which was current then, was the 7094 Model 2, and this was a 27-bit mantissa, and 27, I think, and 8, it was a 36-bit machine.
Oh, 36-bit machine, right, yeah.
And again, one had to run double precision, at least, and there was more than an order of magnitude, there were almost 2 orders of magnitude improvement in running the golem on some of these problems. There were some big machines, either current or coming on the market. One of them was the Manchester Atlas. The other one was the CDC 6600. But both of these machines were much larger, much more expensive, and I guess the Institute was not in a position then to purchase one of these. To give you an idea, the golem cost something like $750,000 to develop, including construction and the peripherals that we bought initially.
We have to point out that the rest of the Weizmann Institute could not use the golem. Only our department had programmers who could write in assembly language. All the other people, they wanted to run Fortran until we had a Fortran compiler. The other people could not use it, and this was done by Moshe Nathaniel. We got our Fortran compiler, and then we became a center for the whole institute.
But in the interim, such people who wanted to work in Fortran used the CDC 1604A, and this was in fact one of the reasons it was bought, I guess, to tide us over, and also to allow people who didn't want to write.
They could not go on.
Maybe one thing I remembered about programming, which is not so relevant to users, but nevertheless, we did write diagnostic programs for the golem A, and they were indeed very helpful in maintaining the machine. But they were rather straightforward and simple-minded, so that they would not only tell you that there's a problem, but they'd also indicate to you where the problem was. But we, as most people found in this area, we found that many of these programs that we wrote specifically for diagnostics did not catch some of the more sophisticated faults, which were difficult to diagnose, particularly whether they were in the software or the hardware. And what we did was we simply supplemented these diagnostic programs with sophisticated programs that other people wrote, users wrote. And particularly, I remember we took one of Igal's problems, the one maybe that you mentioned, and took one section of that, one loop of your program, and used it as added it to our test tapes. Now, if we're going into the more sophisticated software, which a lot of it was done by Moshe Nathaniel, maybe we should say something about Moshe Nathaniel, and maybe Chaim will say something. He has a very interesting history, having been brought out from Egypt during the Sinai campaign.
Moshe Nathaniel was born in Cairo, and during the 6-Day War,
No, it was Kadesh,
מבצע קדש.
Sinai campaign.
In the Sinai campaign,
Oh,
he
yeah,
was
in the
brought out
Sinai
of Port Said, I think.
Yeah, in the Sinai campaign, a boat was sent into Port Said, right?
To rescue the Jewish, to bring out the Jewish community.
And rescued some Jewish families. He was one of them.
He was just a boy then.
Yeah, he was crazy enough to make a good programmer.
He started working for me when he was in the army, Mamram. He was assigned to me then. I was in charge of scientific program at Mamram, and he and Shimshon Katz were assigned to work for me at the time. And then when he got out of the army, I sort of got him to come here. I don't know how he got here, but.
Did he have experience in writing compilers, or he just had the guts to try?
No, he was a programming nut.
I see.
Hacker. Hacker.
That's what they call a hacker
Hacker
now?
and Golem.
No, he was very good from the start. Program where Shimshon was not, but he was always.
I remember the crisis when he announced that he was leaving us. How were we going to get along without Nathaniel? You remember that?
Yes. But he actually completed most of the programs that he created. He completed and left in reasonably good shape. He didn't leave us flat.
First of all, I want to make a point that Moshe Nathaniel wrote the first two operating systems as well as the Fortran compiler, not only the Fortran compiler.
Also an assembler.
Also an assembler. But the thing that was interesting about it, that it did not use the full capability of the machine, because it didn't use the interrupt feature. It was all written without using the interrupt. In other words, you always,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the machine ran for years and years without the interrupt feature. It was only when Bob Ruhman came that it was finally upgraded. And the other problem was that the
moment of silence.
Did you notice?
The original operating system was done by Kopelovich and Ferber, using the very strongly based on the interrupt system.
But Sys1 and Sys2 that Moshe Nathaniel wrote, they were without the interrupt.
Didn't they have interrupts at Mamram?
He was not a systems programmer.
Oh, he wasn't assistant.
Well, the fact is that it isn't essential until you get into a multitasking system like Bob Perman.
Moshe Nathaniel claims that he has to write an operating system only to check the Fortran compiler. It wasn't by purpose that he wrote it, but only for debugging the compiler. He needed something.
Well, which came first, the Fortran compiler or the operating system? From what you're saying, the compiler
maybe checking the assembler. I'm not sure. But he didn't want to write an operating system, but as a byproduct, we got an operating system from him.
You mean you had to have something to run the compiler?
To communicate with the compiler from the outside.
Well, since people are really not saying all that much about the early programming effort, system programming effort, maybe we talk now about the continued hardware program, which then led to a new set of software.
To the software. If we're speaking about software, we have to mention two other people. One is Christoph Frankowski, who was a PhD student and remained here, and he wrote most of the library of the Golem. He had to develop special algorithms for the high precision of the Golem. And the other one is Amir Pnueli, who wrote the Fortran interface for the I/O, all the formatters and all these things.
The drivers, you mean the I/O drivers?
No, but the interfaces between the Fortran compiler, the user of the Fortran compiler, and this operating system.
That part of the compiler which analyzes format statements and I/O statements. That part
was written by Hamilton.
Okay, that brings us to the period when it was decided that the central machine was so inexpensive, and we had already invested in the design, that it was really worthwhile to build a second machine and have them share a set of peripherals and work together. Now, the peripherals they shared mainly were, the main peripheral to share was the disk, but also they didn't really share a printer and reader. I think the printer was attached to one machine, the reader to another, and the disk was common. In addition, in order for them to be able to share this properly, though, we had to give them a higher level communication. And they did, in fact, the machines spoke directly to each other enough to be able to decide on to reserve areas on the disk and so they would not get in each other's way. But mainly, when it came to transferring large amounts of data between the two machines, it would be done through the disk. But one would put it on the disk, and the other one would read it.
Yes, each machine was able to interrupt each other by means of the special registers. Directly, yes, direct interruption
through special registers.
Through special registers, yes.
Okay, and finally, in terms of hardware, then so in fact, this controller was designed to tie the disk to both machines.
Yes.
And while we were doing that, we decided to do an experiment in time sharing, and we put up a very simple, small time sharing controller that could handle 8 consoles, 8 terminals, and these were teletype terminals. And then, and the system was written. An interactive system was written. I think it was one of the Rehoveth brothers. I think you took part in that. Hagi and Ido and Pavel and yourself.
I myself took part. Yes, it's a new Fortran compiler with interactive.
That's right, an interactive Fortran compiler. And the question is, in this thing this system was demonstrated. I don't know how much use it saw actually. But at least the students came, and summer students, people came who wanted to get direct access to the machine. They would use it. But perhaps you can tell us if it's.
We had one teletype upstairs, where the terminals are now on our floor, which could. It was during heavy production time. It couldn't be used because we had to load the new operating system, the new compiler, and make it available for time sharing.
But if I'm not mistaken, these terminals were used by the programmers who prepared software for the Golem B. That is, when they got to doing simulation of the Golem B and starting to prepare programs for the Golem B before the machine actually arrived, I thought that they were using terminals. They had terminals upstairs, and they were using them. They were accessing the machine from upstairs.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, I think Bill Silverman
was cards. That. I remember all our simulations were cards.
Yes, but once you inserted the cards, you could go upstairs and sit and ask various questions and work with it. But this is what I recall.
Were you imitating or?
Yes, simulating the new machine.
Had you studied the operating systems of some other time-sharing machines to see what features you wanted, or you just decided to do it on your own?
I think Svi can answer that.
Well, time sharing was the
range.
Well, the range at the time, and our Bob Perlman was our systems programmer. Then after Moshe Nathaniel, he terribly wanted to do a time sharing system, he persuaded Professor Pekeris to let him try it. He said it will use only 10% of the resources. But the way he computed 10%, it's not that everything else ran and this took 10%, but this time sharing system itself is something, has to be figured for something. So the heavy production programs could not run together with this time sharing system. It was sort of an experiment.
And it would be run, I remember, it was run during the day shift when people might be around to use it, and the evening and night it was off anyhow,
Well,
and then the heavy programs could be run.
Occasional times were set aside to use it, yes.
I wanted to mention something about a curious thing that happened at the early time-sharing scheme with a disk. And that was that you could write short blocks or long blocks on the disk. And when the first system came out to use this, it was written in such a way that if both machines were fighting for the disk, that each one would get a whack in turn, one after the other. And then it turned out that the Fortran compiler had its blocks written in 64 words, and Gerald was using, say, 1900 or 19,000 word blocks or something, and he was reading one block and the compiler was reading one block.
So you can see who got the bigger share.
Yeah.
This is 50% and 50%.
Yeah. That was correct by
Whole
changing.
chicken.
Yeah, whole chicken. Yeah. It was changed simply by changing the block size for the compiler, and that did the job.
Well, actually, the Golem, these two machines together, then lived on for a long time, maybe twice the life of most ordinary computers, because we never put them out of action until 1974 or 75. 76?
Well, no, before that.
I think it's not before 75, anyhow.
We did, the only users left were our old people simulating
The new Golem, yes.
That was, all the other users left us for the IBM machine, for the C65.
But nevertheless, we maintained the machines and it did useful work from starting in 63 until into 1975.
Well, at the very end, it got to be.
It was pretty difficult.
Poor. You know, one day Nadafla Leon wanted to run a program, and he couldn't compute an exponent. He couldn't find the exponent subroutine on the disk. So why can't you cannot run a program with an exponent on it? Well, we can't find out the disk. The disk was copied every night,
yes,
and reloaded, and pieces lost. And why can't you write a subroutine yourself? You can write a subroutine for exponent. It's easy enough. Nadav asked me, but we cannot fix the system so that we can find this subroutine on the disk. So really, in the end, in the early 1970s, the only people who could still use it were Bill Silverman and his people who...
But if we assess altogether the reliability of the Golem compared to machines that we bought, whether you want to compare it to the CDC 1604A or to IBM or some of the IBM equipment we used ourselves, it nevertheless was at least as reliable or more so, because I know the CDC, the 1604A, started to give problems when it was into its maybe 5th or 6th year. There were problems with connectors and
pins,
so on.
Pins on the cards.
And so considering that we built only two machines and we didn't do any real serious tests on reliability, I frankly, I was amazed at the reliability we did get, which just came out of good engineering practice and not out of building things and testing them and having feedback, which is what most of the manufacturers do. they make a machine in-house well in advance of they're putting out the machine in the field. They have feedback on the use and failures in the field, and then they improve it.
The disk was running until at least the summer of '75 when I came back, because the disk was still running.
Yes, but
So it was taken out of service sometimes after that.
Well, there was one big breakdown that we had to bring stuff from Paris and sort of rebuild it almost. But you wanted to say something, Chaim?
Yeah, I have something to say about reliability, but that will come later and discuss the uses, what we did on the go.
Yes, maybe you take over now and I think you talked yesterday about all the problems that were solved with the Weizac. Perhaps you can do a similar thing with the. I'll excuse myself.
One more word before the,
Sure.
And that was that I think in the middle 60s, CDC approached us and said that they were willing to take back the 1604, the 160A, give us a 6400, and we just add $500,000. And I think the second Golem A cost us about 20% of that.
That's about right.
And the 6400 was a much worse machine than the 6600.
One of the reasons it was decided to build a carbon copy was that there was a 50% drop in the price of the germanium semiconductors in both the diodes and the transistors. So that the whole CPU, the main frame that we built a carbon copy of, was on the order of $100,000. Yes.
It was not only a good computer, it was a relatively cheap computer.
Now, let me say something about what we did on the Golem A. By that time, I wasn't the principal user. The Institute faculty at that time were educated, and they had huge projects going, especially the X-ray crystallographers were using a lot of time, and even a chemist like Riesel, who is interested in nuclear chemistry. He was checking some statistical theory of Weizmann from nuclear structure. So the pressure was very, very large. Well, so I can just tell about what we did, how we used the Golem A. Now, the Golem A made its. I heard just now that the Golem A was checked out around February 1964. The Golem A made its debut at an international conference on geophysics and computers in Leningrad in May 1964. This was the, I think, as far as I'm concerned, it was the first serious computational job that the Golem A finished for our group, and that was a paper by Altaman, Abramovich, and myself on the propagation of a seismic pulse in a layered medium. That is a theoretical seismograph. Altaman and I came to Moscow. We spent 1 week holding a conference in Moscow, and then we moved for the second week to Leningrad. And in Moscow, this was a conference on geophysics and computers, half and half. In Moscow, we didn't see a single computer. I think Altaman spoke on something in Moscow, I don't remember. Then we moved to Leningrad. In Leningrad, the atmosphere, by the way, was a little bit more liberal. When I came to the Europejskaya hotel and I handed them my passport, I said, when can I see it back? Hoping that at the end of the week, like it was in Moscow, they just take away your passport and then you have to run around for days, they promise you. So he said, you can take it now. Complete surprise. And the conference was held in one of the palaces, I think in the palace of the kings Tsar's uncle, who was commander-in-chief in World War I. And it's called Dom Uchonych, the House of the Scholars. It was called in 1964. And you go up to the big lecture hall in the palace, some beautifully winding steps. And they also had a restaurant downstairs, it was very comfortable. There were people, Jews in Moscow, who heard that the man from Israel was going to talk, who arranged also by all sorts of ways to get to this conference, and because over there everything is regulated, unless you're invited, unless the head of your division, wherever you work, send you, you just can't go in. And my turn came to talk. In the middle of my lecture, I said, "Now, gentlemen, this is our second week on a conference on geophysics and computers. You've done a lot of geophysics, but may I point out that to this moment we haven't seen a single computer in Russia. And since you are not showing us your computers, I will show you our computer." We just finished a Golem A, and I started showing slides. And everybody in here was thrown on the board, and the people who were wiring the girl from Romania, Nahama appeared there. It was color slide, yeah. And I said, Nahama comes from Romania. The chief engineer, Ruhman, comes from Romania. Gerald comes from Persia. Hans Jarosch came from Germany. Accad was born in Tel Aviv, and you come from, Melman comes from the United States. Riesel comes from Germany. It made a terrific impression, but the chairman felt very embarrassed since I openly accused him, you don't do such things in Russia. And I saw that messengers were running to and from him while I was finishing my lecture. And when I was through, he said, I have a special announcement to make. Tomorrow afternoon, we are going to visit the computer center of the Russian Academy of Sciences in Leningrad. And it was true. The next day, we were taken there. By that time, I had picked up some words in Russia. I was born in Lithuania in 1908, which was under Tsarist rule. My Tsar was Nikolai II, and we studied Russian. I used to read fluently Russian. I still do, but until Solzhenitsyn came on the scene, and he writes Russian, God knows what language. It's a modern language. Tolstoy, I don't even feel that there is a language there. Or Dostoevsky, or Turgenev, but Solzhenitsyn, when his book, the August 14 came out, I bought it immediately. Somebody translated it in Paris. It came out in the original, printed it, the original in Paris. And I struggled for a long time. Every sentence I had to read, and then they explained to me some of the words are Ukrainian. Anyway, after the second week in Moscow, I turned out to be the interpreter to the Russians, what was being said, and so on. And they took us to this academy. It became clear why they weren't anxious to show us. They had Euro 2 or something, computer, or Minsk 1, yeah, and had no magnetic tapes whatsoever. This was in 1964, May 1964. It's quite clear that their computing facilities are miserable. Maybe they had then better facilities somewhere, because only 3 years later they came out with Sputnik. But it was not visible in the scientific arm of the Russian Academy, which, by the way, is a very powerful organization in Russia, handing out all research funds and so on. That wasn't visible there.
Is it all paper tape?
What?
Paper tape and punch cards? What did they use for input output? If they didn't use mag tape?
I think paper tape. Paper tape. And then I remember when the conference was over, there was a banquet, as usual, these international conferences. Now the idea of holding it in Moscow was to induce us Israelis to invite them for the next year to Rehoveth. And we decided in 64 that in 65 the second international conference on geophysics and computers will be held in Rehoveth, and it was held in Rehoveth. And I remember the speech of the chairman at the banquet. He got up and he wound up by saying, "L'shona abod Yerushalayim." Yeah. This was at a restaurant called Nevsky Prospect, on Nevsky Prospect. Nevsky Prospect, it means Fifth Avenue. There's a river Neva going through Leningrad, and this is the prospect of Neva. By the way, years later, every summer I go for vacation in Sils Maria in St. Moritz. Waldhaus Hotel, where I worked up for some years. It's a very nice hotel. Kimberger, it's owned by Kimberger. I told Kimberger about that I stayed in the Payskaya Hotel in Leningrad. He says, "My great uncle built it." So now, what we did on Golem, the work on two-electron atoms was expanded to excited states. I think mainly on the Golem, Dr. Schiff, Kanagian, including Chaim Lifson. But the main achievement was the solution of the oceanic tidal problem. Now, talking about reliability, I remember in July 1967, right after the Salisbury War, Igor programmed the tidal problem. I think it expanded on 8 tapes.
Eight tapes was a simulation. The real problem was on 35 tapes, continuation of 35 tapes.
35.
Yeah, ballet class.
And he would dump the whole contents every half hour, so that if anything happened to the tape, that he wouldn't lose everything. And I remember he had one job, a major computational job. We solved the oceanic tides for every square degree in the ocean. And that constituted, was it 100,000 equations?
120.
120,000 equations. He would solve it simultaneously. And in July 1964, I remember we put it on a Friday afternoon, which is a convenient time to put a long, dragging problem. And it was on Monday that we took it up.
It ran altogether around 80 hours.
80 hours it ran without a single mistake.
Without interruption, except you used to stop occasionally to clean
change
the
tapes,
to change tape and clean, and just clean the head.
So this sort of operation, we did the 1 degree solution so as to make sure that we're not losing anything, that the accuracy in the 2 degree is good enough. But we couldn't afford 84 hours stretches of computing, and that was done only in 1 or 2 cases. And from then on, we relied on the
2 degree
solution.
This was the 8-hour job.
I remember in Moscow, they invited us to the home of one of the leaders of one of the hosts, a typical professorial home for dinner. They invited the heads of the delegations because it was a small 2-room apartment altogether. And in Russia, when they invite you to a banquet like this, all the food is put on the table. They don't serve you courses. The whole thing is right there, from entree to dessert. And when it came to toasting, I had to toast in the name of the Israeli delegation, So I said to the host, I will toast you in English, and you translate it in... I'll toast you in Russian, and you translate it in English. Now, the daily newspaper in Russia is Pravda. The party newspaper, I think, is called Izvestia, yeah? Pravda means truth. And they used to say Izvestia Pravda has no truth, and Izvestia has no news, or something like that. Izvestia means news. And the headline on Pravda, in big letters, the name on the top of the page, is the Russian version of "Workers of all nations unite, you have nothing to lose but your change." That's Karl Marx's, of course,
saying.
Yeah. So I started in Russian. I'll give you the English translation, which he gave. Geophysicists of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your geology. Now, this was a certain approach, being critical of geology. Immediately, Frank Presti who laughed, but he said, I am opposed to the idea, because a few years later, he and another geophysicist, another geologist, wrote a book on geology. But nowadays, the geophysicists feel that the geologists have taken over too much of geophysics, and they would like to come back to Sever, come back to their own scheme, their own realm. A year later, the conference was held in here. We expected it was a time when we had a Russian ambassador here at that time. I knew him, Shuvachin was his name. And before the the symposium was held in here, he visited, Weizmann invited him, the president of the institute, to his house and gave him lunch. And a representative of Intourist came to visit the claw house, the accommodations that we had in our San Martin, because they wanted, a group of them wanted to come here as tourists. Scientists in other fields wanted to come with these delegates as tourists. And then, a Saturday before the conference, there was some squabble on the Syrian border. There was shooting going on. Whether the Syrians initiated it or we initiated it, there was some quarrel over there. They were trying to cut off the water of the Don, yeah? And so we couldn't get excited about it. It happened to commonly, but this Shuvachin, who heard of this for the first time, must have cabled Moscow. And everybody was held back, no tourists, except two people came. A scientist and another, they don't never let out one man, a scientist and another colleague. And this head of the Russian delegation, we had 4 VIP rooms in the claw house, on top of the claw house, which still have, now they have more than 4. They had a private elevator to go up. And the Russian was so impressed by the luxury that he reported to the scientific attaché in his embassy, you must come over and see how the Israelis treat scientists. And one morning I come and he says, last night our scientific attaché visited Claude and was terribly impressed. In fact, this same attaché came to the banquet that was held, where Sholem gave the speech in the banquet. And I reported it to our security officer. Yes, you're not telling me anything new. We photographed this man. And then the head of the Russian delegation, I asked only heads of delegations to talk. There were over 100 people. He said, this is indeed a land of miracles. One miracle is the state of Israel. The second miracle is the Weizmann Institute. And the third miracle is my being here.
Who was speaking for this was
the head of the Russian
delegation.
Russian scientist.
Right.
And this conference takes, this year is going to be the 20th annual conference on geophysics and computers. Now, we also did the dynamo theory of the Earth, the theory that the Earth's magnetic field originates from the core of the Earth is liquid, motion of the liquid, and with the basic question whether you can have a dynamo without any wiring, because there's no wiring inside the core, of course. And we put that on Golem, and we proved. First of all, there were some preliminary solutions given in Cambridge by Bullard, initiated by Bullard. We found that his solution really, if you go a few steps further, make it more accurate, then the solution diverges. But we did find a solution which did diverge and be beyond any doubt, and we exhibited that.
Did converge.
Did converge. So we proved, in principle, that if you are given a certain type of motion, which we assumed, and that was part of the difficulty, to assume the proper type of motion, that you can have a dynamo, a steady dynamo, if you maintain the motion somehow. So that the idea that you can have a dynamo without any wiring is a valid one. And I must say, in all the computations which Accad carried out, as far as I know, there hasn't been a single mistake. Anything printed is valid to this day. Nothing had to be retracted.
Did you cover the models of the Earth?
Oh yeah, well that I talked about a few days ago. Yeah.
But there were some. You've been talking about your own work or the work of the department, and indeed, in the beginning, when there wasn't any significant software, maybe that's all that was done in the Golem. But once the compiler came into use, and a number of other departments that do heavy programming started to use it, particularly the physicists who brought some big programs from abroad, and nuclear physics. There were people in isotopes who ran big problems. There were people in chemical physics that worried about the structure of large molecules, and they, I'm sure they did. There was a lot of work done in these areas too, which I don't know if I can summarize.
The physicists brought programs from CERN. We were a foreign partner in CERN, in this nuclear research center near Geneva. They brought programs which they adjusted for the Golem A, and they were operating them. They were the cloud chamber photographs, which were made in the accelerator in CERN, were brought in here, and they read the coordinates of the particles
and analyzed them
with the aid of Golem, and they were a steady
custom
user. In fact, they were they have gone to such dimension that they started complaining that they're not getting enough time for their needs, and that is when the idea of having an IBM machine came to the fore, under the force of the physicists.
What year was that?
1970.
How would you compare the Weizac, Golem A, Golem B to current computers or microcomputers or minis?
Well, it's a little hard to compare them directly because simply because the early machines were not as sophisticated. In fact, some of the microprocessors nowadays are, in their organization, in their architecture, much more sophisticated than these early machines were. But I don't know. Tzvi probably knows what what was the multiplication time of the Weizac. I don't know. I have
The
it
Weizac,
here.
you can say 800 microseconds.
800 microseconds. So
Golem 8 microseconds.
yeah, and nowadays, but maybe you say addition, because in most microprocessors, multiplication may not be available, or it may be a you may have to do a little subroutine to run.
Well, Weizac was about
50 on the Weizac.
50 microseconds.
Perhaps 2 or 3 on the Golem.
So the Weizac was an order of magnitude slower than the first microprocessors to appear.
No, but when you speak about the Weizac, you mean fixed point multiplication and addition, and the Golem was floating point.
Yes.
Yes.
Floating point was software on the
Yes,
Weizac,
and
and it took about 3 milliseconds
Right.
for double precision multiplication.
Yes, and when I compare it to the microprocessors, again, I'm talking about fixed point on the microprocessors.
Also, it's 8 bits or 16 bits on the Weizac.
And there it's only 8 bits or 16 bits. So you really have to do some. I would guess that it is not true that the first microprocessors exceeded the capability of the even of the Weizac.
For the current ones.
But the current ones, oh sure, if we take some of the more advanced ones that say I'm familiar with, like the 64K, is it?
6800?
68K Motorola.
Oh, 68,000, yeah.
68,000,
32-bit.
and it has multiplication built in, and it's a 16-bit. It has 16-bit and 32-bit. I think you could easily say that exceeds the in the Weizac, even in features, not by a long shot, perhaps. I don't know.
At least a factor of 10.
In fixed point.
Yes.
In addition, yes, but in addition, fixed point was 40 bits.
40 bits.
40 bits, and we still talk. I don't know what the addition in 32 bits is on there, but it's a lot faster. So it depends where you're
2
talking.
microseconds was Motorola.
16 megahertz.
But then you can't compare. Look at the features you have now on the microprocessors. You have virtual memory or memory.
Altogether, you have much faster memory. Core memory never was better than 10, 15 microseconds. And now you have semiconductor memory.
we had on the Golem, we had 2
Oh
microsecond
yes, but on
memory.
the Weizac it was...
On the Golem A, it was already a 2 microsecond
Yes,
memory
yes,
interlaced
yes.
to give us an effective 1 microsecond per word.
But on the Weizac you had 15, and all these microprocessors have much faster memory.
That's correct.
Did you ever imagine back then that there'd be tens of thousands of Weizacs around?
Well, as a matter of fact, I tried acting as a prophet in this article, which I gave you, the one about this popular article. And I said that there were at least 2 orders of magnitude in the near future. And so I think it was pretty clear.
But that was 1966, wasn't it?
I wrote that in 63 or 64 or something like that.
If you're through with the Golem, you might say something about the intermediate.
Yeah.
1604.
And then we can, if you want to, wrap up by just discussing things that you might.
I think the area that we wanted to talk about, which we haven't gotten to, is the impact of these developments on. Here we were talking about the scientific work that was done, which impacted, say, science in the world, but we were also interested in the impact that these developments made on local in Israel, on not just in the Weizmann Institute, but throughout Israel and industry and so on. And but if people have some unfinished business or odds and ends to wrap up, why go ahead and do that first.
Yeah, a little story about the interim computer, so-called CDC 1604. When computing pressure grew, I started thinking about getting an interim computer, and our director, scientific director, the late Professor de Chalit, said, how about tying the Rockefeller, the Rothschild group in London, Rothschild. So I prepared a proposal. I wanted $1.25 million for buying an interim computer. And Lord Victor Rothschild came down to Israel for the purpose of officiating on a ceremony, an annual ceremony which still goes on, the awarding of the Rothschild Prize. And by the way, the team with Mike Melman, Smil, Ruhman, and Riesel won the Rothschild Prize for Golem. And so I carry my proposal in my pocket, and as the Lord stands there and shakes hands with all the guests, I pull out my proposal and I say, here. This was an unwise, he took it politely, but it was an unwise move. I got no reaction from him at all. Yeah? Apparently that's not the way to submit proposals. About a year later, Amos the Shalit says, how about raising the issue again? So I updated the thing, and this time I gave it down to Shalit, and Rothschild came, stopped in San Martin, and question was, who are, Amos asked me, Amos the Shalit, who are experts who might advise the Lord on the importance of your proposals. I mentioned some names. I mentioned the astrophysicist Chandrasekhar. I never know whether they ever turned to him. And Amos was telling him, he stayed a few days in San Martin. Amos was telling me things are not going too badly. One day he comes in to me and he says, we are almost there, but
not a huge but it made a connection to the U.S.
Yeah. By the way, before Amos tells me we're almost there, but Victor wants to know whether you have. I was suggesting that we buy a CDC computer, and Victor wants to know whether I had proposals from other companies. Maybe you can get it for less. So now. Before then, I made a trip to London, and I saw, among others, this Sir Leon Buckridge, who took me out to a sumptuous lunch, and he was trying to convince me to buy his computer.
The Elliott.
So what he wanted, really, they had a computer under construction. And as usual, it was years behind. He said he will sell his computer at a very low price if we will send our engineers to London, to his laboratory, and they will help finish the computer. That was Sir Liam Bartlett's idea. I listened carefully. I also went to English General Electric. They were selling computers, and I wait, and a man comes in and he says, I'm Lord Ironside, a young fellow, about 30. Must have been the son of the General Ironside. Anyway, this was Lord Ironside, and I tell him about it, and he says, I'll send you a proposal. And when Amos asked me, are there any other proposals? I ran to the file and I pulled out a beautifully bound proposal from English and General Electric, as only the English can do, on high-quality paper, from which the conclusion was obvious that the CDC is
way ahead.
Is way ahead. But Amos walked out with a beautiful answer to Lord Rothschild's request. That was on a Thursday. Next day, Friday afternoon, as usual, I was in at the Golem. This was a time where you plan what is going to be done for Saturday. In walks in Victor Rothschild, and he says, "You have $1.25 million," and walks out. So then I met with a representative of Control Data, because in Princeton University they had bought a 1604 which was doing well, and at that time the 1604 had a good reputation. I met with the vice president of CDC from Indianapolis, and he dined me. As a matter of fact, Fania Shalom, he also dined at
Maybe Minneapolis?
Minneapolis. Yeah, Minneapolis. What did I say?
Indianapolis.
Minneapolis, yeah. And we negotiated basic terms, price and so on, equipment. And then some months later, a whole delegation came down from Minneapolis. President Norris of CDC, he's a businessman, the treasurer, and they sat in the Dolder Grand Hotel, which is a posh hotel in Zurich, and I was negotiating on behalf of the Weizmann Institute all alone, and he had a direct line to Minneapolis, because I was posing what appeared to be rather tough problems. And I didn't know that as far as CDC was concerned, that moment, it was in the fall of 1961, I think, it was a rather critical one, because they were planning to go on the stock market on January 1st. And it was important to them to show sales. They were negotiating a sale in India for one computer. And I put up some rather tough conditions. They didn't agree when it comes to negotiating, of course, and always there was a crisis. When I ask something, they run to the telephone, the open lines, what shall we do with this, what shall we do with this, and then they come up. And it was agreed. And then in the fall, Peter Rabinowitz and I went to the United States to sign a final contract. I told them I have $1.25 million and no more. And if you can't accommodate what I want within that sum, then nothing will go. We came to the New York airport, and I got through the customs. You know, in New York, every suitcase has to be opened. I wait for Penny. He doesn't show. I see he's held up by the customs officer. Turns out he was going to be a week in Indianapolis, so he bought himself sausages, food for a whole week.
You didn't think there was going to be kosher food in Minneapolis?
Anyway, that was up, yeah?
How did he manage in Russia? When he was with you
No, he didn't go to Russia.
Well, he went later. He went sometime later.
He went to the Far East.
Then we present with Norris, we ironed out a contract. The main question was how they're going to serve us. They didn't have their final Accad leader. They had something very bought CDC, from which we suffered. I remember we had all sorts.
Then they exchanged it for.
And I signed a contract with CDC. A couple of years later, I was in Minneapolis, and I walked into Norris, and I said, "You know, you gave me a tough deal." And Norris became red in the face. He says, "Of all the people I had to negotiate with, you complained that I gave you a tough deal." So, and the 1604 did some good service. Oh yeah, that was not the end of the story. When Sir Leon Buglett, the head of Elliott Corporation Computer, heard
Elliott Brothers,
that Rothschild gave us $1.25 million, and instead of buying something from him, and also sending our engineers,
taking British money and
also sending our engineers to help him, he was building. I don't know what went on his mind. When he heard that, he got on the phone. And he wouldn't let go. He complained. There were telegrams flying forth and back, and I had a tough time to to solve it, I had to write a long letter to Lord Rothschild explaining why we didn't consider that
Elliott machine.
Elliott machine. Well, I'll say one thing for the Sabbagat. They produced a paper tape reader, which cost about $1,000 or so, which we bought, and that worked very well.
The fast one.
Huh?
The
Yes,
fast paper
Weizac.
tape reader, the one that the paper shutout paper tape.
1,000 characters per second.
That product was good.
Well, the story of the 1604 reminds me, and your tough dealing, reminds me of our problems with the memory and the golem. In fact, eventually I was accused of driving American corporations into bankruptcy. I got a name for that because of the dealings with the memory. But on the golem, we didn't build our own memory. We bought it to our specifications. And we designed a tester in order to verify that it met the specifications. And the specifications were written, included test programs, test patterns, which are still a problem to this day, even with the semiconductor memory. The question always is, can you tell what is the toughest pattern? Now, the problem with semiconductor memories is that, in fact, the customer can't tell unless the vendor, the manufacturer, will provide them with the pattern, the design, the chip design, which they, of course, never do. Now, it was easier in the old days with core memories because you could, in fact, know what the pattern was from the design. So the specifications specified 10 patterns, of which 4 patterns, some 4 or 6 patterns we specified in advance, and I left myself 4 patterns to be determined at the time when they provide the preliminary drawings. That is, it was after so many months into the contract, they were supposed to provide us with a set of drawings showing the preliminary drawings showing the design. And then I had the right to specify these patterns. And as a matter of fact, it was obvious from these drawings that there were some hazards there, and we designed and it involved not only the information pattern, but also the sequencing. That is what you run a pattern and its inverse in certain sequence and so on. And that produced the worst effect on the sense amplifiers, which were capacitor coupled and caused trouble. And in fact, they could never meet the spec, and they tried for a long time to meet the spec. Eventually, we were willing to compromise on that because, in fact, such a pattern can never occur in an actual run. And we were willing to compromise, but then other problems arose. For instance, the drive circuits would every so often blow up, and we would have tens of power transistors would fail.
They had corrosion in the.
Oh yeah, no, I'm coming to that. But the real thing that broke the straw that finally broke the camel's back was that the wiring was beginning to started to corrode, and apparently when they soldered, they hadn't cleaned well enough, and so there was flux that was left over, and this gives out certain gases that attack the copper. And I can remember Tzvi sitting one day scratching his head, trying to work out. There were some very wild symptoms, and And finally, we got the idea that this was a short between two of the windings, and it gave some wild symptoms. But so eventually, we in fact officially returned the memory. At least we got the money back. In fact, they left the memory with us. We paid them some small
getting the money
amount.
back, I will have some to tell you.
Well, I suffered through that mostly. And you tell the story about Norris with all his. I can remember after many of these sessions, finally, they asked me to come to negotiate with them in Chicago. I was in New York, and so I take a trip from New York to Chicago just for a meeting. I get there. The president, their lawyers, their accountants, the chief engineer, all these people, there are about 6-8 people sitting in the room. I'm alone representing the Institute. They didn't even offer me a glass of water. They really tried psychological warfare. Never mind, I come all the way from New York just for this. Never mind a cup of coffee, they didn't offer me a glass of water. And they really tried to get me to get excited, to get rattled. But I saw what the game was, so I just held my peace and just told them whenever they brought up the question, I just told them the way I saw it. And eventually they gave up and they let me go home, and that was the final meeting, which after that they decided to return the money. So,
No, you're talking about CDC.
No, I'm talking about Indiana General with a memory.
Indiana General, yeah.
Well, this was an aside. Now, if there is... Oh, you have something?
Yeah, about this particular problem. They claimed that because the Ziskin building also contains chemical laboratories, and therefore, obviously through the air conditioning, the corrosive effect was being caused coming in through the air conditioning. And the countercharge to this was, of course, that we also have the CDC working from the same air conditioning, and it didn't affect the CDC.
In addition to that, we ran a set of tests, which Zvi's wife, Arella, helped me to set up, and I had wires, copper wires of the same size and make, draped all over the Institute, in the computer room, around the computer room, in my lab, everywhere. And we followed this thing for years and took data, and in fact, I had some of this data to show them at the time.
Yeah. About getting the money back from Indiana General.
Yes.
I told this difficulty to Zygmunt Warburg, the banker from London, who became a friend of the Weizmann Institute around that time. When I mentioned Indiana General, he said, I know who are the owners, bankers, old colleagues from banking business from Germany. And I think he must have talked to the owners, and they gave in. Because they were tough, they wouldn't budge.
Yes, but we had the head of the American Committee at the time from Boston.
Dewey Stone?
Dewey Stone did a lot of negotiating for us, and he sat in on the meeting with me in Boston once. So I'm sure that helped too. But I want you to know that Indiana General was a very reputable company, and they were in fact the first to make ceramic magnetic cores, and they were the ones who supplied the cores for MIT in their original program. That when Papian developed the thing for Whirlwind, and it went into the SAGE program. They supplied the cores for the SAGE program. And in fact, while I was in Boston working for Raytheon, they built a commercial machine using the cores which they rejected at the SAGE program, and then I took the cores which were rejected by our own people, and used them to build an airborne navigation computer, a memory for an air navigation computer. And the point is that, so all this I'm telling you is that they were the suppliers at the time, and just to show you that it wasn't some company was just starting, but that they just had a hard time with this.
Cars were always weird.
Well, I might explain that when I say that I took the rejects from these people, in a real sense, they were the best cores, meaning they were the most stable. It was just that they were looking for speed, and if you were willing to do with a little less speed, you would get a core which was slower, but had a better margin. That's not yes, it's related to the hysteresis, but they call it a shmoo. In other words, you measure the range of operation against a number of parameters, and you call that. And if you do it in more than 2 dimensions, you get something that looks like a shmoo. Shmoo was a strange animal invented by some
Accad.
Accad was okay.
You definitely have to explain that. It was a lot of curves. It looked like sort of looked like a bowling pin.
Yeah, very rounded thing that looked like some kind of a fat person without the arms and legs
and
or
you
something
squeezed
like
it,
that.
you got 2 of them.
Yeah.
Like that.
But anyway, this was the term. This is a technical term that has remained in the engineering literature to this day. I think you wanted to say something, and then
I decided I would wind up.
Yeah.
And this is I'm addressing myself to you, Richard. I've enjoyed the last 2 days so much that I am concerned that I have developed a taste for a new vice, appearing on television, which I don't like at all.
We don't know whether this will ever be aired. I mean, we just know that it's going to go into the... But even if we spend 5 or 10 minutes, there is one topic we didn't cover, and that is the impact in the country, not of the both of the machines that were built locally.
And also, if you could say something about technology transfer to developing countries and whether there's any...
I'm afraid I have nothing to say about that because there wasn't any.
Well, even that. If you think there's no parallel between Israel, whether other countries...
Oh, I see. You mean not whether there was any transfer, but whether...
Yeah, did you do it right or wrong, and how would you do it again, if at all?
Well, look, it's a proven fact that the best way to transfer technology is to do it with people, by moving people to the place rather than trying to move the information. That has always been the most successful, and this is what this was part of the. This certainly played a big part because Jerry came from Princeton and to do the Weizac. And I came from the States and did the at least if we talk about the technology, not the machine, the machine architecture, the broad architecture of the machine, but the hardware, the technology. And although I didn't work directly in that, and I developed it, but nevertheless it was based on my very recent experience. And that was a quick infusion by people who. But there were many others who, like Tzvi, who didn't spend very much time abroad and who worked with Jerry here and then did spend some time in the States going after the memory, I think. But then essentially he spent almost all of his time in Israel, but he worked with Jerry and then he worked with me for a while. And he was able to absorb a lot of this without on his own by contact. And of course, Mike is a different example. He also went and he spent many years in the States. Some of them before the before Illinois. I think that this sort of thing is very crucial, particularly in very fast-moving technologies like the computer technology. It's almost indispensable.
And everything was open; nothing was classified. Very little was proprietary commercial secrets.
None. In other words, well, as you heard from Chaim, we had the Iliac was developed in Illinois, and we had they were free. They in fact, a number of other people also took information from Illinois and used it to build their machines.
No, it was agreed upon.
It was
at
agreed
the
in
outset
advance.
that,
We had
they
prior
were-
agreement.
Yeah.
None of this came
in fact, it
from
would have
commercial firms.
No.
All came from universities, Princeton and Illinois.
In fact,
Those commercial firms, IBM, would not let you see their diagrams. You have to be a Japanese and buy them or something.
I presume, I assume that Illinois, the University of Illinois, would have been better pleased to see us essentially copy their machine, but because I remember getting a rather cool reaction in Illinois when I went after we were well into the program and had practically built a machine. But then I think the place altogether in Urbana, or is it?
It was on Urbana, but they knew.
I found the atmosphere to be rather chilly there, although it was very hot in the summer. I mean, it was chilly socially.
Why was that?
I don't know. I think it was just the kind of place. I think
I
knows the
think
place
that
well. Maybe he can explain it.
They knew that their whole methodology of construction was very outdated for that time.
And they weren't surprised, you mean?
Yes, of course, they were not surprised. They'd never expected us to actually copy their style
yes,
of
but to do that and complete the machine
yes.
before they completed theirs, I think that hurt a little.
It hurt them a lot because they looked at us and saw how fast we adopted a whole new method of technology. Changed the word length from 52 to 75 bits.
And still got ahead.
Used a brand new circuit and still finished in record time.
That's right.
Compared to their program.
I want to say a word regarding their program at Champaign-Urbana. One of the things that they did there was they essentially built on exchange visitors, which meant that they had no continuity. Most of the engineers came there, did something, and left. And there was no documentation. When I was there, a lot of the people had left, and there was no documentation of what they had done.
Now, in the period I was there for 2.5 years, and all of their key people were all graduates. There were all graduate students working on PhD programs. Yes.
Yeah.
They all got PhD degrees for finishing their designs, each in their own area, for the advanced control, for the delayed control, for the control logic in general. I think there were 3 or 4 people this way. There was no shortage of manpower. Where they did have a lack of manpower was in the I/O. That's true. Chris Wallace, who designed from Australia, who did the interplay, left them after a while, and Harry Beardsley, who worked on the drum, he also left, which meant indeed they were left without any people. That's true.
Look, and if you compare it to the people we used, why, there were just, maybe on the average, we had 4 people working on the hardware. And part of the time Mike wasn't here, he came a little later, and then we got Ami Kaspi and Reuven DeRose helped, but that's all. If you talk about engineers that contributed to the, so we did it with a handful of people really in a year and a half. So they had people who stayed with them. I mean, Robertson was with the project all the time. I could name you 5 other people that what stayed with the project almost throughout.
But there were some of the areas where they didn't have the people, and they wasn't, because the lack of continuity, they were held back because of
no doubt about that. Were you saying
This would mean I thought I would say something again about the applications, scientific use of the computer. Just changing the subject a bit.
Sure. Well, okay. We're rambling a little. I'm going to change back.
I know what happened. Yeah, I know what happened in the field of geophysics. In geophysics, in the United States, where computers were available, it wasn't, I think, till about 1960 that the number of geophysicists who were using computers became substantial. And we have had 4 years in here hammering out all sorts of numerical methods of solving differential equations. And one of the, as far as I remember, one of our difficulties was there was a huge effort being put in numerical analysis, theoretical methods, and there are huge, very clever routines of solving things, of doing things, mostly invented by people who never applied them on the computer. When you try to use those very tricky methods, you found that in order to implement it, it takes you years, and the final result didn't pay off. For instance, Accad, when he had to solve linear differential equations, and that was, he spent a lot of time in doing that, always inverted the matrix. This was considered old-fashioned. But he never relied on results of getting an approximate solution and then improving it. He did the 100,000 equations on the tide by inverting 100,000 order of 100,000 matrix. But whatever he got, he knew was reliable, and I think could have been justified. It has been justified by the final result. If you get an approximate answer from a computer, you never know whether you've got anything real. So, I think in the year 1958 or 59, Eagle inverted a determinant of order 1078. Was it 58 or 59?
Yeah, but this was a sparse matrix.
Sparse matrix, but still it was. And he did a full determinant of order 260. 220, which was quite an achievement for the
4K memory.
Yeah. And I have the impression that people began to realize in the United States that they better go in very heavily into the computer applications because we show them what could be done with the computer.
Well, I'd like to get back to our relation or impact, if any, on in the country. Now, there were, of course, many personal contributions. You've already heard Pinney talk about his outside activities, not only teaching but consulting, and this is true for all of us. But in fact, the Golem did not have the kind of impact that you might imagine. That is, the impact. One of the impacts it had was simply one of a psychological effect. That is, the fact that people in Israel saw you could do such a project in such a short time and build such a machine, a sophisticated machine, and make it work, inspired a lot of confidence in other people to. And there was there was some indirect impact, but really to make a direct impact in terms of industrial developments, it was not really. These two things were just not compatible. That is, here at the institute, the objective was to build as fast and as big a machine to solve the world's big problems that you couldn't solve with existing machines. But this kind of machine is about the hardest to market. And that is, if you're going to start a company and start to try to market such machines, you have psychologically the biggest barrier, because these decisions have to be made at a high level. And then what about support in terms of maintenance, in terms of software and so on? It usually frightens people to get tied up with some overseas company and so on. The real way to get into to computers commercially was obviously to do it on small machines. And in fact, this is what I had been doing in the States before I came to Israel. And what I'm trying to say is that these two things, while for me, I sort of made changed over my orientation to the needs of the Institute, but this was just not compatible with industrial or commercial development. And in fact, the first commercial the computer development in Israel came from a group in Haifa which set up the Elbit. And these were people who had worked on computers in the Defense Department laboratories. Any effect or help that they got in terms of consultation, which to their second generation computers. The impact, large commercial impact, really came from the Golem B, which perhaps as a scientific achievement was not as big as the Golem A because of the fact that we fell behind in our schedule. But in terms of impact on the country and on industry here, it was the Golem B that had the largest impact. Part of it, in fact, because of the fact that it didn't succeed as well, and the fact that we were late meant that it took us a little longer. We used more people. It was a bigger project than we expected, and there were maybe 250 people came through the project. In some stayed for a short time, some for a long time. Many of the people who didn't even play a central role with us learned enough to become leaders in industry in various areas, in technology, in printed multi-layer printed circuit technology, and in all aspects of computer design. And not to speak of the major things that some of the people who worked on Golem A and Golem B went on to help such successful companies to make a success of it, like Cytex, or to mention only one that grew up in the Institute, and a number of others. Perhaps somebody else has something to say about impact in the country.
I just have a couple of words, and that is that at one time or another we have used a lot of staff to program mainly subroutines during the course of building these computers. And a lot of these now have, some of them have obtained doctorates and are in key positions. And others who were not scientific programmers are now in the commercial programming business. And, you can look around in a computer conference and you see a lot of people that used to work here at one time, that have been through here in the same way as the
Well, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that more than half the key people in computers in the country have had some have either learned, studied in here, or they worked here.
Not today anymore.
Not half, no.
People who studied abroad.
That's what you call key people, yeah? Yeah.
That's right. Well, if we define it, I'm sure we could get more than half. But I'm not. That was not my intention to.
Perhaps at one time, but not anymore.
Well, I think we should be glad that that's the situation, if that is so.
I think you said all you want to say. It's getting late and hot. So thank you all very, very much. We really appreciate it. I'm sure somebody will look at this. I'm going to look at it.
Well, thank you for
we'll
putting
take
up with
snippets
us.
out of it and show to other people. And maybe 2 hours out of 6 or 8 is not bad.
Okay.
You're finished?
Finished for good. You have a bunch of forms here that have been signed. Did you sign it? Yeah, they're. I don't know if ever.
These are all.
No.
I didn't do it. You did. Finished.
I took back the report that I gave you.
Okay.
I think
I didn't copy.
I will sign it.
I have some slides.
You did get
slides for me, so I don't know if I can try. I'll try.
Yeah.
So who'd you get? You've signed
It's
it?
that we don't do anything in this without your permission.
Can we do it again now?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Jerry, do you want any of this material?
No, I think
This just
once
sort of,
again,
but we're saying
they're going to
that
come look at this material and see if there's
any historian who wants to look at it,
I
look at it,
don't
you can't
really
copy
would
it
like
without your permission.
earlier.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to
When it
use
shows up,
anything
Why don't
you
you
want.
next year when I'm back, I'll see it in the
Oh,
archive.
because we can use it in the
If
library
it's done, it
for
really is.
historical purposes.
All right, get it
That's
over,
what.
you know, your shelves, I think you'll be delighted.
Well, delighted.
But I think it's, it has to be organized a
It
little
looks
bit.
like Wednesday, so I don't know what to do tomorrow.
You think Israel would have survived if the computer didn't exist?
I think it would have survived. I don't think we did it any harm, though. I think I can name a few.
it easy.
I can name a few influences that were more deleterious than the computer.
I think the thing that really happened that really killed the home-built computer is the fact that now, in order to make these little jukes, chips
We should have a private
that they stick in now, that you cannot do it except in mass production.
Much more so. I mean, you had to amortize anything like an operating system development over the years. There's no way.
One thing nobody said, I forgot about that. There was at one time a move afoot to sell the Golem paint.
Yeah, of course.
We didn't
Nobody
do
it. Yeah.
No, it was interesting. Everybody had
We didn't
different.
talk
we
about
didn't talk
it.
about it.
In 1965, when we finished the second copy, we were gung ho. Let's go out.
Let's go out.
To build more. But we had a list of 10.
Find customers.
No.
Everybody wants it.
The
It's a different
administration.
system.
There was no support.
I see.
2 years later, then they came to us asking,
I thought you couldn't find.
I don't think you
No.
know the whole story,
No.
because I sat in on every one of these meetings, and I can tell you where the problem was. But it's, I'm just glad we didn't bring it up. I can tell you some stories.
Oh, you're not telling me. You're not telling me. Some stronger than Norton. Somebody stronger than
You're on tape.
That's not fair.
Tell a story.
There are some people I wouldn't like to name. Some of my best friends. But I'll name them anyway. I really like him. This is, I've had a lot to do with him since. He's a real nice guy. And that's Yaakov Katzenelson. But he was one of the representatives from the Technion. The idea was that these 10, one would go to each of the universities, and there would be one in Dimona at the and one in Nahal Soek, and so on. And in fact, we had some customers who were ready to buy. But I'll give you just one example. He came down for the first visit to sort of look over the Golem and see how it works and what we have to offer and so on. And you know what his first remark is? He said, people that if you want to sell a computer in the States, they will take you a trip there, but at least he said they buy your lunch. Here they didn't even invite us to lunch. I want to tell you this is
Very important. Anybody in sales will know that. Yeah.
okay. This is just that's all.
That's
That's all I wanted to tell you.
That's right.
today.
With 3 martinis.
The real nasty thing that I don't want to tell you today. Okay.
You want to make sure you're not online.
Because he is. I don't trust. I don't trust Richard.
You seal it.
I think he is. I see the lights are still blinking.
Not only that, the network is connected to Tripod.
It's the right.
Richard, you probably should go down and put the Weizac and the Golem to
I'm
get
keeping
some
the
good
lights to
footage.
do this tomorrow. We'll see if we can. Sometime we got an hour.
Well, the Golem is not around. It's dead.
I
Did
know,
they
but
ever
they
save
go-
a piece of it? We have some.
The next 3 days,
Maybe
I will
we'll do it
that.
now.
Why not?
And I have photographs.
Now we got
and
something
films.
else to do.
Okay, that's
He got on
that's
the
more
telenet.
important. Now, maybe right after.
We have slides,
Richard wanted
Yeah,
to
we
I
have
would like
slides of,
If you can make copies of the
Golem
slides.
A, Golem B, and some boards. I've got boards in mine.
And one that I can give to the museum and then it's,
If you twist my hand hard enough.
You don't, you give it if you have time. Send him a letter.
That's right.
We'll see what happens now.
I've been reading it again, and
Next time comes
I'm
the
interested. It seems interesting.
Okay.
Your address.
Yeah.